Whenever you are.
Okay, well, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hank DeLay, and I am the chair of the Tompkins County Independent Redistricting Commission. I'd like to welcome everybody to this third in the series of public input sessions that we have scheduled to solicit recommendations from the public, and especially from interested members of the county legislature and other municipalities in Tompkins County on the important subject of redistricting. I see that members of the commission are in attendance via Zoom, so I'm going to begin by asking our Deputy Clerk of the County Legislature, Brittany, to call the roll.
Hank DeLay,
Here.
Jeffrey True,
Here.
Carolyn Chang,
Here.
Here. Yep.
Chuck Nocera,
Brittany, you're
Here.
on mute. Yeah, down in the lower right-hand corner.
Making a quick adjustment for Brittany's microphone. Okay.
that's okay. Okay, left up, okay. Chuck Nocera,
Here.
Elliot Imel,
Here.
Jan Vink,
Here.
Marsha Lynch,
Here.
Margaret Hobby,
Here.
Vivek Iyer.
Here.
That's terrific. 100% attendance. Thank you all very much for being with us this evening. I'm going to say just a word or two about process, and then we'll get into the specifics of this evening's invitation for students, especially to participate. This commission is charged with being independent. We have sought to have at least a semblance of bipartisanship, since most of the members of the commission are registered with the Democratic Party. Our vice chair, Mr. True, on my right, is a member of the Republican Party. We want to have this process be as transparent as possible. And that's why we've consciously chosen to have our first 4 sessions devoted to soliciting input from the public. Tonight's session, we have specifically solicited comments from the student population of Tompkins County. There are upwards of 20,000 students in Tompkins County. And when I say students, I'm talking about students of essentially college age students. Some are resident on campus properties, whether it be out at Tompkins Cortland Community College or at Ithaca College or Cornell University. But of course, many, many others live in non-campus properties, and many have been active locally in a whole array of civic activities, including political activities. I'd like to go through the criteria that New York State has set out as the factors that can be considered in redistricting. Earlier today, Jan Vink and our staff director, Greg Potter, and I participated in a webinar that was held by the New York State Association of Counties concerning redistricting. And this program, which brought together legal and political science experts from across the state, was designed for the provision of helpful information to county governments across the state. And I think it really went very well. Jeffrey Weiss, professor at New York Law School and noted counsel for many redistricting efforts across the state, presented a series of slides dealing with everything from the most recent amendments to the Municipal Home Rule Law, which affect local redistricting, to court cases that have challenged various redistricting endeavors across the state. One of those slides, and I'm going to ask Greg if you can share it, sets forth the criteria that redistricting efforts at the county level, and indeed for cities and school districts, all being affected by this, must consider as we go forward. And so I'd like to ask Greg to share that slide with you. And we'll just go down the list. If, as I'm going through these criteria, if any of you have questions or comments that you'd like to make, please interrupt and we'll just focus on that for a moment.
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
So just want to confirm that everyone can see my screen since I've shared it. Okay, thank you.
People seem to be saying yes. I think that's the answer. Okay. So chapter 516, that means chapter 516 of the laws of 2021, sets forth a criteria that we will follow in the weeks and months ahead. The first and most important criteria is population equality. And there is a change that occurred last year in reducing the amount of deviation that can occur from the average size of a district in a county from a maximum of 10% between the largest population district and the smallest population district, reducing it from 10% to 5%. As you can see on the slide, it indicates plus or minus 2.5%. But in fact, of course, you could have a district which was 4% higher than the average, and another district, the smallest district, no more than 1% below the average. Similarly, 3% above, 2% below, and so forth. That's a change from the 10% standard, which had been in existence for many decades here in New York State. And as a side comment, it was noted that the author of this legislation, a member of the State Assembly from Westchester County, had served as president of the local League of Women Voters. And she began challenging the lack of a standard for non-charter counties that were operating their redistricting under local laws rather than under a state standard. And she wanted to see that an appropriate state standard was enacted. 20 years later, she's been successful, and that's what happened last year. So sometimes it takes a while. So population equality is the number one standard, the most important one that we have to follow. We have to be aware of and cannot intend to or result in denying or abridging any minority voting rights. That's a result of the federal voting rights legislation. And after that, we have a number of what I call perhaps the 4 C's. The districts must be contiguous. And these are, incidentally, it was emphasized today, these are in order of priority. So the ones that follow are each time less of priority than the one above it. But districts must be contiguous. They must be compact. They cannot favor or disfavor incumbents or particular candidates or parties. They can consider existing district cores and political subdivisions and communities of interest. And since we're talking about students this evening, question was raised during the course of the webinar today as to whether or not students constituted a community of interest. And the answer was affirmatively that they do. So they can be considered a community of interest along with neighborhoods, various political lines such as villages, hamlets, and so on. There is also a provision that no village, city, or town, except those having 40% of a full ratio or more, can be divided. I'm going to ask Greg if off the top of his head, he can recall whether any of the villages in Tompkins County meet that standard. Certainly the city of Ithaca does, and some of the towns, I think, do. But I don't believe that we have any villages that are more than 40% of an average.
Of a district, that we're probably gonna have to we'll need to pay attention to the village of Lansing and the village of Kew Heights in this scenario.
Right, but if we had 7,500 plus persons as an average, do we have villages in excess of that? No.
We should be fine. It's when we get into the mapping and the numbers, we'll have to pay attention to this one and see how it plays out. But in particular, we have, this statement would reduce our ability to not include the entire village in the scenario, which is a good effort on our side as well.
Our effort will be to see the villages are maintained as discrete entities rather than being divided. And last, but certainly not least, for the purposes of efficient administration by our County Board of Elections, we are to consider their priorities in terms of creating election districts that are reasonable and available to the public. So those are the criteria that we must follow and will follow. Let me pause and simply, if we can take the slide down, ask if any of our members of the commission or any of members of the public who are with us this evening have any questions about that listing of criteria. You can see if anybody is using the wave your hand function of Zoom. It looks like everybody is muted at the moment, so I don't know if somebody has to signal if they do have a question. If not, Okay. Hearing no questions about that list of criteria, let me then turn to Greg Potter, our staff director, and ask Greg to give us all an overview of the statistics of population and population change for the county as a whole and for the districts that currently exist for the county legislature. Greg?
Thank you. So first off, I'm going to just give a little background of the information that we already have publicly posted on our website about the project. So if you go to the county's homepage, which is tompkinscountyny.gov, there's a link directly off of the homepage. Down here under quick link section for county redistricting, that's going to redirect you to tompkinscountyny.gov/redistricting. And on that site, if you'd like to subscribe, we have an option to subscribe to future news and updates through an additional service, which is up in the top left-hand corner of the redistricting website. And then we have posted all of the information that I'm about to review under the links here to the left. If you're so inclined, you can dig a little bit deeper and look at the archived information from the 2012 project that we did for redistricting, as well as the 2000 projects. So there's two previous efforts that all the information is posted. So first, I'm going to start with the current comparison of the populations by the 14 legislative districts. So that is a map that is presented with a zoom in of the city, the urban core of the city of Ithaca. The top number will be the number and the percentage of population for the previous census count in 2010. And the bottom one is from 2020. So the area that we're covering or discussing tonight is primarily in legislative district 2, 4, 3, 12, and 11. So, and as well as TC3, which is in district 14. So those are the areas that primarily encompass the college students or the traditionally encompass college students. You'll see that there is an increase in all those districts except for the Dryden area and population significantly or just a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But in the city of Ithaca, around the Cornell campus, you'll see an increase in districts 4 and 3, and there's a little anomaly which I'll talk about here in a second between districts 2 and 4. Where the Census Bureau had changed some of the block geography that amounted to a decrease in District 2 and an increase substantially in District 4. Thanks to Ruth Aslanis from the city of Ithaca, who produced this wonderful map. If you zoom in on one area, you'll notice that one of the blocks that used to be associated with the legislative district 2 has now been associated with District 4, which is the College Town district. So that's this area right here. So that grabs the dorms that are in the West Campus area and shifts those geographically into a new definition of a block, which used to be previously split into 3 sections, which is now 1 assigned to district or ward number 4 in the city. And district number 4 from the legislative side as well. So there's a little bit of a difference there. I'm going to go on to present to you some of the basic information as well on the statistics of population between the districts and the municipalities that is available on the website as well. So I've got the 2010 and the 2020 populations. And you'll see that the districts I was just referring to, which is a negative 15% change, which was the district 2, is primarily a result of that change of the block geography from the Census Bureau. So if you run through these numbers, you'll see generally that there's an increase in population in the areas for student population traditionally that we're discussing this evening. In addition, we've produced some information in a spreadsheet about what the 5% total variation of the ideal would be if the legislative district count is changed from anywhere from 11 to 19 in these scenarios. Currently, we have 14 legislative districts in Tompkins County, where the mean and the ideal population with the new population would be 7,553 per legislative district if we maintain 14. So this is a guide generally as we produce maps in the future that we cannot, if we maintain on average negative 2.5 and plus 2.5 from that ideal, this is the variable that we have to deal with in terms of population count. But that can generally change a little bit if we go down to something less than negative 2.5, let's say negative 1%, then that upper level could be increased. So, but we won't know that until we get into the details of producing the maps and the scenarios. But that's just a general guide to start us with. Really just a quick review of the numbers before we jump into the details of the mapping that can kind of gauge where we're going and try to direct us to the right decisions based on the math of what we're doing here. That is primarily it in terms of the information that I have to present. So I'm going to pass it on back to you and stop the share.
Well,
and I can,
before you stop the share,
Yep.
let me just invite any of the members of the commission who have any comments or questions for Greg. If you do, please feel free to ask him right now.
I have just a general question. So for counties our size nationally, how many legislative seats do they typically have? So, we are at about 100,000 people. So what's does anyone know the national average? It's an open question, not just for Greg.
I can tell you that it's far fewer out west. So in some of the western counties, they by default only have 3 legislators. When you move back east across the Mississippi, because of the history and the townships and the organization of different levels of government in the hierarchy, the number tends to increase at the county level for legislative districts. But in New York State, it's a little bit more complicated because you can also have a difference in representation at the county level based on Board of Representatives at the township level that have a weighted average to voting. So every town has an elected representative at the county board, but that's a weighted vote. We have a specific situation where we have a much different or a different situation, which most counties do, and where there's one elected person per legislative district. But even then, in New York State, it ranges quite significantly up to 20 some in some of the counties with higher populations.
There are 41 counties with single member districts such as Tompkins County and 16 counties with weighted voting, the weights being assigned to the legislators based on the population size of the area that they represent. Any other comments from the commission members or not? If not, we'll move on. Today, I'm sure many of you have already heard the news that the United States Supreme Court last night, by a 5-4 decision, refused to implement for now the decision by a 3-judge federal court, appeals court in Alabama, which set aside the congressional map that the Alabama state legislature had adopted. The federal court determined that the map was unconstitutional because it failed to provide adequate opportunity for minority voters in Alabama to elect more than one member of Congress. The majority of the Supreme Court did not rule on the substance of the congressional plan, but rather said that effectively it was too close to an election schedule and that they would therefore let the plan go forward and argue the case during the course of the next year before making a decision. The net effect, of course, is that for the congressional election in November 2022, this particular legislative plan will be in effect. The words that were not used in court decision, but certainly in the briefs that were presented by the plaintiffs in the case, referred to hacking of the district. By that, they were referring to the decision to pull together minority African-American communities in several different municipalities to concentrate their vote rather than effectively allowing them to be considered in their separate municipalities. But the net effect that you had, and I don't know the exact percentages, but perhaps districts with 80%, a single district with 80% African-American population, as opposed to another district which might have had a much lower but still significant minority population in more than one district. So you have two concerns of hacking and cracking that we will have to take into consideration as well as we go forward. With that, why don't we open it up for comments, recommendations from the public who are participating today. I'd like to, since we specifically invited student organizations at the three colleges to come this evening, if there are students from any of those institutions who would like to say something to the commission, please, again, wave your hand, hit the hand function waving on Zoom, and I'll try to recognize you. Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you all, and I appreciate you having me. I did speak 2 weeks ago on behalf of sort of myself as a person on the Ithaca Common Council, and I wish to make it explicitly clear that in this capacity, I'm hoping to speak not as a city official, but just as someone who has lived throughout the different communities within Cornell specifically in terms of college communities. I run Cornell Votes. I'm one of the folks who helped sort of rejump the program in 2020, and we saw a phenomenal increase in voter turnout in 2020. And in that process, we got thousands of people who complained to us about the voting process and what it was like for where they lived as well. And so, I was really appreciative before of the sort of priorities of how districts need to be formed by contiguous, compact, and then considering communities of interest. I wish to ask that you consider even the sub-communities of interest within some of these university communities. So for example, at Cornell, all freshmen and first year students are required to live on North Campus. The North Campus community is one that I was a part of. I know that there's other students like Lucas who are on this as well, that everyone who came in as a freshman at Cornell and even many transfers know North Campus as the hub of being your first year at Cornell. However, in both the city and the county lines, North Campus is split in half, and a majority of the students are in the second district or in the Northwest, and the rest are in the third in the Northeast. If you look at the polling sites and if you look at the students who are there, I want to actually come to that contiguous part first. It may be contiguous land-wise to go from the northeastern part to the southeastern part of the third district. But let's say like you were myself when you were a freshman and you lived in one of the low rises, right? You were one of the 2,200 students in that census block. Your polling site is in the most southern part of the Bell Sherman area, of which a bridge doesn't connect you without first going through the fourth district and going through College Town to get there. So contiguous is something I think is really important. And at least in me, the gorges are deep and students don't swim across them. And so making sure that it is both contiguous from people getting to the polling site, that is really important as well. I know the conglomeration of West Campus into one census block is going to shift the fourth and second wards and districts as well. I would really encourage that if the fourth ward is going to be removed, or sorry, I apologize, if College Town is going to remain as that fourth ward in the center, and that you have the West Campus system move in to other parts, that you consider grouping up the North and West Campus systems. The North Campus and West Campus systems are groups of students who do and act a lot of the same ways. I would certainly think of them as a community of interest. And especially in the current system, the low rises, Muse, and the new the new dorms that are go up next to Appel Commons. It's a lot of students who can't realistically get to their polling site in an accessible way without taking an hour's round trip to get there. So I would encourage, when you think about contiguous, to consider that Ithaca is gorgeous and we have gorges that go through our city and go through our region. And that it's especially difficult for students who don't have cars, who don't have means of transportation and use the TCAT or walking for most of their getting to and fro, that it is difficult for the North Campus students to be looped in with the Bell Sherman and East College Town neighborhood. Final thing, I just wish to add, after speaking with a lot of folks living in Southern College Town, I know State Street serves as a great sort of divider for a lot of the sort of the way the third and fourth districts and wards separate themselves. There are a lot of students who are a part of these College Town communities that are sort of excluded from the rest of College Town and then put in with the rest of City of Ithaca and Tompkins County. Specifically, College Town Terrace apartments are hundreds of students who are one door stop on the other side, and they don't get the chance to politically participate in sort of college students and college town politics in sort of that area. So I won't waste a whole lot of your time, and I apologize that I did say a lot, but sort of in sum, I'd really like you to consider how the splitting of North Campus residents affects them politically, affects them in wanting to participate in the political process. When your next door neighbor is in a completely different district and that their polling site is next door, but yours is an hour TCAT right away, I'm not sure how much they want to participate in the political process, which I think we should always be encouraging folks to do that. And the second thing being, depending on how you all decide to split up either include West Campus with College Town or move West Campus into a new district, I really encourage you to keep the student voice very strong. I am very excited by how many more students are participating in government recently, especially in local government. And anything we can do to encourage that, I think, is a step in the right direction. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. You're certainly not wasting our time at all. This is exactly what we were hoping to hear this evening. It is a voice from at least one person in the student community. You mentioned large concentrations of students on those two areas of North Campus and West Campus. Just for the benefit of everyone who is watching, if I look at the map which has been prepared by Ruth S. Lannis of the city staff, I'm looking at approximately 3,600 to 3,700 students in the 2020 census who were on North Campus. We have then, as Greg showed in the map that he was dealing with earlier, the West Campus census block, just one of them is 1,975 students. So if you add roughly 2,000 onto those 3,600, you're up at 5,600 students. That's, if you were to have all of them together in one district and to make them contiguous, you'd probably have to add another, I'm looking at the numbers, 400, 500 students to keep them in a position to walk in the single district from one area to the other. You're at what, 4/5 of the size of a legislative district. You're at almost 90% of the size of a common council ward. What happens in that kind of a circumstance for students participating in local government if those students in particular are only freshmen and sophomores due to the Cornell policy of having those students on campus?
Sure. So, my immediate thought is, especially, when I sort of did my math, I separated the on-campus students and our sort of off-campus students. A lot of graduate students, including one of the Ithaca 5th Ward Common Council members, Rob Cantelmo, a lot of PhD students who live in the city of Ithaca for upwards of 7 years and then sometimes stay and teach, live in those areas, especially when they have young kids and to raise families. So I personally think when I think of the Cornell student population, I think that's, yes, there are a lot of undergrads, but there are almost as many graduate and professional students who are doing similar studies, and usually for much longer. So I think of all the students who live in Greek life, who live in those areas, especially in the northwestern part of North Campus, that would connect both West and North, as students who live there for long periods of time and who stay in Ithaca afterwards. I think of all the professional and graduate students who come here to get a further degree and then decide to raise their families here and send their kids to the Ithaca School District. So I guess the point I would highlight with, yes, it would have it so that there's a lot of freshmen and sophomores in this space, but it would also have a lot of students who are involved in Greek life. It would have a lot of students who are involved in professional, and it'll have a lot of other residents who just live in the 5th Ward and in that area as well.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you would have a preference for pulling together North Campus, then I think you're referring in a sense to Cornell Heights, and down to West Campus as a single district. Is that essentially what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that be considered. I think I'm not suggesting that that's the end all be all to the situation, but I know West Campus is, and I live in West Campus right now, is sort of the ugly middle child at the moment where, well, should we stay with College Town or should we go with other folks? And, we're throwing, especially with the 5% rule, we're definitely throwing some of the population things around. So as I guess I present it as one possible solution to what do you do with West Campus now as one census block.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else from the student community who would like to speak to the commission? Lucas Smith.
Yeah, certainly haven't done as much research as Patrick. And I go to Patrick when I have questions about any kind of things like this. So yeah, Patrick, thank you for laying all of this out and for being a tireless advocate on behalf of students. I'm a senior up in Cornell Heights, so 2nd district for the county in 5th Ward. So kind of fitting into this picture that we were just talking about. And what do we do? I'm almost in Hugo Heights, actually. I'm on the line. My neighbors across the road are all in Hugo Heights. So I really appreciated the discussion and suggestion from Patrick of figuring out how we take some of these student populations, such as myself, who are up in Fifth Ward, Second District, Cornell Heights, and pulling them back down per se into a district more represented with other students, if that be College Town or a portion of College Town. That sounds really exciting to me. Yeah, again, I guess I've been around Ithaca 4 years and lived my entirety of my educational experience in Ithaca up on this side of town, I guess you could say. So little bit different than College Town, but representing the student interest in a way in under one block, I think is a really valuable approach. I think Patrick said it best at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, kind of emphasizing that sentiment. So seconding that now. And I think back as well to the discussion about North Campus being split, and through my capacity a number of years ago as the Director of Local Relations for the Office of Student Government Relations at Cornell, I know having conversations about the split with Legislator John, who I see on the call. So that was something that's come up a couple of times, and it's one of those things that, well, in my tenure per se, we never came up with a good answer to, and in terms of how we engage students and help, from the student side of things, bridge that gap and address that. So seeing this opportunity with redistricting to make it a little bit easier for us as students, there's interest from students to figure out how we engage students on behalf of lifelong residents and things like that, and legislators. So Patrick, as he mentioned, Cornell votes, things like that, in the Office of Student Government Relations. So it would certainly be a really big help for the organizations that are pushing to get students involved with these local government sectors to have a little bit more clarity and less jumping over gorges, as Patrick was saying, per se, to get students around to figure out. So yeah, I really appreciate Patrick's comments, and I agree with his proposals, I guess you could say.
Well, thank you very much, Lucas. I see that we have, as Lucas has just mentioned, at least 2 members of the county legislature who are on the screen with us, Legislator John and Legislator Brooks. Would either of you like to share any thoughts with us this evening? Rich, John?
Yes, please. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying thank you for all your work. I hope you guys are having a great time. This is really important what you're doing, and it's hard. So thanks. I'm going to come in with a slightly different viewpoint on trying to identify and block out districts based on student population. I've been through 3 elections, and I have worked really hard to try to get students engaged in voting in the local elections. I think 2020 was a different year. That was a remarkable election. And it was, of course, a national election. And we generally get turnout for those votes. And they don't really depend on which district you're in. You just register and vote. Steve DeWitt, I see, is on the call. Steve and I have had multiple conversations about the voter registration lists. They are woefully out of date because the students move on almost a yearly basis. So trying to find the voters is a real project. I've worked at this. I have my first time through, by the way, when I was running against another student, who really couldn't generate student votes either, as it turned out, I went door to door trying to find those voters just by what the list showed, and I couldn't find almost any. The next time around, I went to the landlords, their rental offices, and showed them the voter registration list and said, can you tell me for the buildings you own, who's there? And they would just cross off names. There were almost none. I went to the fraternities and sororities that are in my district below the law school. I was getting a hit rate of 2 but they weren't at the house. They had moved out. So they had been there, they'd been registered there, but they were somewhere else. Most of the people graduate and they go on to their lives somewhere else. For those that I was able to contact and, talk to, they didn't really register a great interest in local politics, as, a few did. I mean, I've talked to Lucas and I applaud his efforts over the years. He's really worked at this. But I have as well, and I just don't see it. If you're going to try to create a student district, which effectively really has been done in District 4 of the county, as my understanding was really designed to try to get a good block of student voters, you get tremendously poor voter turnout. Some of that could be ascribed to me being a terrible campaigner. Maybe so, but the numbers weren't really any good before I got in office. And as I said, I ran against a student the first time I ran, and I thought, yeah, he's going to generate a lot of interest among the students, and he didn't. I won on a write-in, and that was really only possible because voter turnout was so low. I'm afraid that if you really work to make one district just students, that's going to be the result in the local elections. You may get good turnout in the national elections, but in the off years when the city and the county are putting up candidates, I wouldn't really expect there to be a lot of voters who are knowledgeable and interested and registered and actually do vote. I wish it was otherwise, but that's been my experience. The other comment I'd make is—
Rich, if I could just interrupt for
Sure,
one moment.
sorry, go ahead.
I mentioned earlier in my comments that we had participated earlier today in the New York State Association of Counties webinar dealing with redistricting. And I submitted a question to the panel, which read as follows: is voter turnout a legitimate factor in local redistricting? Our city has a very large student population with very low turnout in both presidential and local elections. That was the question that I posed. The answer: no, voter turnout is not a factor in redistricting. The student issue is not uncommon, but voter turnout cannot be a factor in redistricting. As an example, children can't vote at all, but they still are represented by elected officials. So I understand what you're saying, and others in our previous public sessions have made similar comments, but I think it's important for you to know the legal position taken at the New York State Association of Counties. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Please go on if you wish.
No, thanks, Hank. And I certainly don't want to argue the law. It is what it is, and you have to make your decision based on the criteria before you. I would say that I think there is a good community of interests between College Town and the Commons, that you have very similar sort of mix of residential, retail, restaurant, and businesses located in those areas that have common interests. I think it's a far better approach to look at that as deserving some commonality, and otherwise treat students like Ithacans. Certainly try to engage them, get them to vote, but don't try to segregate them into a district to think that you're going to get a clear student voice out of that. I just don't think it's going to happen. But I don't want to talk about voter turnout.
Thank you, Rich. Travis Brooks, legislator from District Number 1 in the county legislature.
I just wanted to thank you all for your work on this. I would say this is my first time running And, you know, in my district, the race is kind of, it comes down to the vote in June, and students are gone. And when we were knocking on doors in District 1, I would say, you know, Seneca Street, Buffalo, Albany, a lot of streets on going toward the south side where there's a lot of students. We spent a lot of time knocking on doors and not getting answers. And it was tough. So, you know, like Rich, to create a district for just students, I think would be pretty tough. And I'm not sure what the effect would be. Students aren't here in June. And it just was even in April and May, trying to connect with students in March when we were trying to get signatures. There wasn't a lot of response or activity from students. So.
Thank you, Travis. Okay, let me open it up.
Patrick has his hand up.
Patrick has his hand up. I just spotted that. Thank you. Patrick.
No, I apologize for going a second time, but it was something I had mentioned at, I believe, the city and county redistricting hearing that I just wish to sort of say again. One, the voter turnout part and sort of the legality of that, but the second of, there are a lot of members within our districts that can't vote no matter what. I mean, specifically, you know, within my district, I have a lot of international students who aren't US citizens. That doesn't make them any less my constituents, and that doesn't make their needs from the city and county any less important. It actually sort of comes to me to say, well, do I help them because they're going to get me elected, or do I help them because they're one of my constituents who needs help? And so, at least from sort of my perspective of whether or not they vote or not, you know, I've dedicated a lot of my time to trying to get as many people registered to vote and then turn out as possible. But regardless of whether or not they vote, they're still constituents and they're still members of the community who should be represented in some way. So I just wanted to add that last part of, regardless of how much they vote, you know, it's always going to be an uphill battle of us trying to update voter reg rules every year. It's always going to be an uphill battle of trying to reach folks who get really swamped in May and December and who might not be here in the summer months. It's still important to include them as much as we possibly can and to make sure that they're being represented.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, comments from any other members of the public who are part of the program this evening? Anyone? Okay, any comments from my colleagues on the commission members?
Yeah, Hank. Greg, can you tell me what the city population is versus the county?
32,103.
32 versus 103?
The city population is 32,108 and the county population is 105, 700.
32 over one. So basically the city is
A third.
just under a third of that. Okay.
So just to be clear, the 32,000, that includes student population, right?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Okay. I do note that we're pleased to have with us this evening both our county attorney, Bill Troy, and also a member of the Board of Elections, Steve DeWitt. Bill or Steve, do you have any comments you'd like to share with us?
I can't think of anything. I think Steve's thinking if he's going to say anything also.
Well, the voting on the Cornell campus is always a challenge, and the turnout is generally low. But the other thing that is tough for us is when you carve it up. Like right now, I believe there are 4 unique voting districts within the Cornell campus, which means each one of them has their own election district because the ballot is unique. It's different from all the others. And that is because 3 wards are cut into the campus along the 3 county ledge districts. And a little bit more cohesiveness would, I think, be helpful from our standpoint.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
I think I had another question if I could.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
We have a
Someone in the chat?
question that came up on the
Yep,
chat.
okay.
Chuck?
I'll address Chuck's question first, if you're okay with that. The 32,000 that we talked about is referring to the population of the city of Ithaca, which incorporates, so all the population stats include the student populations, regardless of the municipality that they reside in. So of the 105,000 roughly for the population for the Tompkins County, that includes students from all across the county, not just the city.
Jeff?
Hank, I'd like to ask the 2 representatives on the legislature how they would feel about weighted voting. That's unbelievable. Nobody wants to say anything.
I would certainly offer, since I had the heaviest district, I sometimes say it's the densest district and the densest legislator, but the idea of weighted voting did get brought up. I think it's a non-starter. The rural districts would fight it tooth and nail, and every vote would be incredibly complicated trying to do the math. So I don't think it's a good idea. I think you do the best job you can trying to get the districts close, and then we live with the differential.
So Rich, why do you think that 1/3 of the counties in the state of New York go to weighted voting?
Well, I mean, I'm sitting here arguing against my own interests that I would have more power than the person sitting next to me. I can't imagine those. I think Cortland might be doing it that way, in fact, but I don't.
I think a lot of
I just think it would be very hard.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, Jeff, is simply the function of history. Boards of supervisors used to be the county legislatures years ago, and each supervisor from each town sat as the county government. And when one man, one vote was decided by the courts in the 1960s, they had to figure out what to do. Most counties moved to a county legislature system with single member districts. A few chose not to and chose the alternative path. Well, I've got another follow-up then on Jeff's structural question, if I can.
Jan has it up as well.
Who did?
Jan.
Okay, I'll come back to Jan in just a minute. But since we're on the structural question, I'll ask again, everybody, if they have a comment. What about having more districts? Well, that's really a city question, I should say, but I'll ask it anyway. For Travis and Rich John, they had thoughts about instead of having 2 persons in each ward representing common council, if that were split up to single representation for a larger number of wards, where you might have either 10 or 8 instead of 5.
I think what would be really helpful is if you could get as close alignment as possible between the wards and the districts, so that there would be essentially parallel representatives for areas within the city, but doing the math on it, I think is really hard, right? I think going to 15 on the legislature, if you needed to get there, would be fine. But I don't know if you can get within that 5%, but you guys tell me.
Okay, so I said my question was really, I was in my mind thinking city government structure more than the county legislature. Well, Gwen Guo,
Hi.
and then I'll come to Jan.
Well, my question is, I know the focus is on students in this meeting, and we've been discussing how many students to concentrate in one district, right? But given, I'm in Ward 4, and given that there's so many students in Ithaca, and for example, Ward 4, somebody had said at the previous meeting that it's 90% students. So my question is actually, how many non-students to concentrate in one district?
Well, again, we think of neighborhoods and communities of interest. That will continue to be the case. Certainly, Ward 1 is the least dense, I believe, of all the districts, or all the wards in the city. So it varies quite dramatically as you go from one western portion of the city to the east. Jan,
Oh,
I
sorry.
apologize.
Can I do a follow-up on that? That's not quite what I meant. I meant how many should be, how many non-students should be concentrated in one district? Yeah. Like I said, like right now, apparently in my district, it's 10% non-students. So I just have that question because we're talking the other way, which is an important conversation. But given the large number of students, I'm wondering if we can address the other end of it as well. Thanks.
Well, that's the flip side of packing, and where you essentially would say, use the term cracking. And is it appropriate to take the student population and distribute it as widely as possible into contiguous and compact districts rather than having them concentrated in a single district or district and a half, whatever. So we'll be looking at all of that. Jan?
I have a question. In one of the previous meetings, if I remember correctly, there were new laws that stated that there should be polling places on campus if there were certain thresholds. And I was just wondering if that would change the situation. Patrick mentioned the distance to the polling place being too large. Would it give us more flexibility in splitting up the campus if there were more polling places on campus?
Let me just ask Steve DeWitt then. Steve, at the moment, which are the polling places that are actually on the Cornell campus?
Right now, we have one polling place that is on the campus. That's Alice Cookhouse, and that services three or I don't know, maybe as many as 5 of the dorms on West Campus that are in the 5th Ward, and the rest of it down in Fall Creek, down behind at the high school in that area. The other polling places, West Campus now votes down at the town of Ithaca Town Hall, the other part of West Campus, along with College Town, and then the other 2 districts, which are unique, but they vote at Bell Sherman. And the thinking behind that in the past has been that if you don't get, we haven't had turnout, when we've had them on campus, and all through the the aughts, we had campus, we had site on RPU. And, you know, even though it was right there in the North Campus dorms, the turnout was no better then than it has been when we've had it at Bell Sherman. And the reason that we don't have as many on campus is partly because of the way it's carved out. You know, Bell Sherman bleeds into the campus, and, you know, historically we know that very few students have voted in those elections, and we have to staff the site. So we also know historically that the residents that live in the city don't generally like to go on campus to vote. Although that hasn't really been a problem with Alice Cook because it's right on the fringe of the campus. But yeah, it's tough to put, you know, to justify putting a polling place on campus for a fraction of the students when most of the district is not on campus, and we try to satisfy most of the voters that we can when we're drawing districts. Again, that's why I was suggesting that if you could, rather than having 4 different districts on the campus, if you could break it down to 2, that would be a huge improvement and be a lot easier to you know, maybe get something going on campus. Although there is a new bill that's passed the Senate and is in the governor's budget bill, which would mandate that we have polling places on campus for any campus that has over 300 registered voters, which Cornell is always in that category.
So under the bill that is pending now in the both houses, since the governor's budget bill is a little bit different than the bill that's already passed the Senate, it would simply require a polling place on any college campus that had more than 300 registered voters living on the campus. Cornell, by having a polling place at Alice Cook Hall, already satisfies that requirement. Election district administration most certainly can take turnout under consideration for where you have your polling places, but that's not one of the factors that we're supposed to consider for redistricting of the population.
And if I'm correct, that new bill that is being considered in the assembly and is in the governor's budget, I believe it says we have to have a polling place for all of the students that are on the campus. You know, even though we have Alice Cookhouse right now that only services, you know, 300 registered voters from the campus, we would have to include all the people on North Campus to vote at a place on campus rather than at Bell Sherman.
No, I think it simply says if there are at least 300 registered voters who live on the campus property, you must have a polling place on the campus property, without saying for how many students. In other words, there's nothing in the bill about a ratio of polling places per 2,000 or 3,000 students. It's simply saying you've got to have one if there is a polling, if there are at least 300.
Yeah, but wouldn't the polling place have to service all of those students? All 300 of them?
No, it doesn't say that.
Oh, okay, well.
No, I mean, that might be a fine idea, but that's not how they wrote the bill at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to speak to the commission? Patrick, I see your hand is still up, and Chuck and Sarah. Chuck, you're next, Chuck.
Sorry, I had to unmute. This may be a question more to the city than to the issue of students, but I'm curious what the response is when city wards are combined with sections of the town of Ithaca to form a district.
Anyone like to share a comment in response? Rich or Travis?
Well, that's certainly what we have now. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, that it would be great if you could get alignment between the city wards and the county districts, but I don't think mathematically you can do that. And one compromise would be to get as close as you can and include some areas slightly outside of the city in some of the largely city districts, is my guess. But I think you may need to do that in any event. Did that answer the question?
Well, what immediately raised for me is perhaps fewer wards in the city so that you didn't have to combine with the town.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, that's more a change for the city than for us, I guess. But
to the town. They know. So say that.
Yeah, currently the city of Ithaca legislative districts, there are legislative districts, the county that are entirely contained in the city boundaries. There are 4 legislative county districts that are completely contained within the city of Ithaca boundaries. But the math of keeping 14 districts this time around wouldn't support that. So it would have to be the town districts that surround the city would have to encroach into the city to compensate for the difference. So there's going to be a shift if the scenario is to stay with 14 legislative districts. We mathematically cannot keep the city intact wholly, period. That's a fact.
Okay. Patrick Mailer, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to I know the bill that passed the Senate is, I think Steve might be right about it's with districts. I dropped the text into the chat, but at least at the moment, like with the cookhouse, for example, there's 5 main houses on West Campus, and only Cook, the most northern one, has a polling site. Like I live in Hans Beta, which is 3 houses south. And just like Steve was saying, my polling site's, a 20-minute walk away, as opposed to Cook, where I had dinner in yesterday, which is a 2-minute walk away. So Steve and I have talked a lot about student polling sites and trying to figure out, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of students don't vote in this area, so we move the polling site, but now the polling site's far away, so they continue to not keep voting in that polling site. But I think the centralization of the putting like North Campus and West Campus, together in theory, is that you then have one polling site that is easier for them all to get to. And there is that sort of sub-community of interest of all of West Campus interacts with each other very frequently. We have the same dining halls and professors and housing arrangements. So I know the polling sites are not a part of the redistricting necessarily as like we're doing this because of polling sites, but in terms of keeping communities together, I think something that does help is having polling sites with the same communities. I think people are a lot more encouraged to participate in the city when, you live in low rise 9, but the people in low rise 8, they have their polling site right there and your polling site's in Belshramen. Or if you live on West Campus and people in Cook have their polling site in the dining hall and your polling site's, 20 minutes away. So just one more thing to add, that the polling sites and where you decide the center, I guess, of a district does matter. And it does, I think, breed engagement.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. I'll quickly look to my fellow commissioners, ask if any of you have any other comments or questions you'd like to raise. If not, then we will close the public comment portion of this meeting and turn then to the important matter of approval of the minutes of our meeting of January 25th.
Hank,
Aye.
I'm sorry to raise my hand again.
Yes, Rich.
Just for the benefit of the commission, it's my understanding Cornell is going to change its policy and require freshmen and sophomores to live on campus.
That's
Which
correct.
may enter into your consideration that you'd be looking at a subset of the student population that would be concentrated. Anyway, it sounds like you're already aware. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes of the meeting of January 25th that has been distributed?
So move.
Move, second.
Second.
Any discussion? Any amendments?
Noticed a couple of typos.
Margaret.
I can't find it, but Seth Murtaugh has a G at the end of his name. And
Margaret, microphone. Oh, sorry. Just a couple of typos. Seth Murtaugh has an H at the end of both names.
H at the end.
Right. And under input from legislators, municipal officers, et cetera, it mentioned 119 people voted out of 800 residents. I think that must be 8,000. I'm sorry, it starts Gwen Gall, Tompkins County Democrat Ward chaired for the 4th Ward. This is the start of the paragraph.
I think that's in her ward.
I thought the wards were a lot bigger than that.
Well, the wards are smaller than 8,000. But we can check on that. We'll follow up on that, Margaret.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other amendments? Not all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Future schedule, we will meet again 2 weeks from tonight. I believe that's February 22nd. And at that session, we will have the last of our 4 public input sessions focusing on the towns and villages on the east side of the lake and the south side. So we're talking Lansing, town and village, Groton, town and village, Dryden, town and village, Caroline, town of Ithaca, Danby, and the village of Cayuga Heights. I hope I've got them all in there this time.
Village of Freeville.
Ah, Freeville, forgot it
Last
again.
time too.
Okay. So that will be February 22nd, starting at 5:30. With that, I have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Whoop, Ruth.
One hand.
Do I see Ruth Aslanis hand up? Ruth?
Yeah, just a quick answer to the question about the size. The wards from 2012, the largest one was Ward 5 at 6279. So it must have been 119 of 800 registered voters, possibly. 8,000 makes no sense.
Right. Right. Okay. Motion to adjourn. Yes, Brittany.
I had one
We
question.
can-
Going forward, after the public input sessions, are we still going to plan on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays? or-
Yes, I would like to do that. If I have no objections from the other members of the commission, that we will continue to do that on every 2-week basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.